What's up? I'm Bea and welcome to my living room. Today begins the first installment of what will be the first more than two-part series that I've ever done on my channel, and it is going to be about the book To Train Up a Child by Michael and Debbie Pearl. A lot of y'all have heard of this book and seen other videos about this book, and you warned me. You were like, get ready, it's a lot, you're gonna be mad. And I was like, yeah, probably. Like, looking at the reviews on Amazon, I'm probably gonna be pretty upset with this. Did not realize how upset I would actually be. And so I think this deserves a little bit more attention. We gotta talk about it. These people don't have like a massive following, but their following is pretty big, and according to their own reports, I don't know how much I believe this, but they've sold over 600,000 copies of this book. Any more than one is too many. So that's 600,000 people who potentially have this book. It was published in the 90s. It is a little bit older, but as we've seen, as we've kind of explored YouTube, there are plenty of people who subscribe to this kind of traditional evangelical approach to marriage and life. Before we get into the actual book, I want to just go over this article from the Seattle Times. It's from 2011, and it states that there are 3 deaths that have been linked to this book, or to parents who have read this book. So I'm not going to read this entire article, but I'm going to give y'all just kind of the brief synopses, whatever, brief kind of overview of the 3 cases. So, Michael Ramsey, the district attorney for Butte County, California, successfully prosecuted Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz for hitting their daughter, Lydia, to death in Paradise, California in 2006 with a plastic plumbing supply tube, the kind the Pearls mention in an article on their website called In Defense of Biblical Chastisement. Lydia, age 7, was adopted from Liberia. Her transgression, mispronouncing the word pulled from a children's book. She said, "Pull Ed," according to Ramsey, and the hitting began. Kids say things wrong all the time. Like, I'm already infuriated. Why are you gonna hit your kid for saying something wrong? The Pearls also drew fire after the 2006 murder of 4-year-old Sean Paddock, who suffocated after his mother swaddled him too tightly in a blanket. Lynn Paddock told a Johnston County, North Carolina court she wanted to keep her son from getting out of bed. Yeah, I have a 3-year-old. He gets out of bed. When he knows that the next day he gets to do something exciting, he does not want to stay in bed. You know what I do? I say, when are you allowed to get out of bed? If I need to go potty or get a drink. Yep, that's when you're allowed to get out of bed. Other than that, you need to stay in bed. He gets out again. We give him the other reminder. You can't keep getting out of bed to play around. It's not playtime. After the 3rd time, it's, okay, next time you get out of bed, you're going to lose this privilege. You're going to lose your tablet, a truck that you really like. You don't swaddle a 4-year-old so tightly that he suffocates. You don't kill your child for getting out of bed. Moving on, she was a devoted follower of the Pearls, prosecutors said, and she had come across the writings while surfing the internet. She is now serving a life sentence for first-degree murder and felony child abuse. Next case, in Washington State, the death of Hannah Williams marked the 3rd time the Pearls' names and their book have surfaced after the death of a child. But the first time, Washington State child welfare officials had come across it. The Williamses have pleaded not guilty, and their case is in the pretrial phase. Hannah, age 13, was adopted from Ethiopia in 2008 by Larry and Carrie Williams of Cedro Woolley. She was regularly spanked and locked in a closet. She was forced to sleep in a barn and take garden hose showers outside, according to an affidavit from the Skagit County Sheriff's Office. In 2009, Hannah weighed 108 pounds, but over the past 2 years of her life, she lost 30 pounds, largely because her parents denied her food as punishment, which you should absolutely never do to a kid. The affidavit says she was so thin she couldn't retain enough heat May 12th, the night she died. She'd been outside with no clothes and died of hypothermia, an autopsy found. On the backs of her legs were marks consistent with being beaten earlier in the day. According to the investigators, the Williamses were familiar with the Pearls and had given a copy of their book to an acquaintance. Larry Williams, 47, a Boeing worker, told the sheriff's detectives that the children were disciplined with a piece of white plastic more than a foot long. It had a round ball on the end, and he said he picked it up at a plumbing supply store. So it's obviously just ridiculous, a litany of red flags. And the thing that was very interesting to me, because I've read the first chapter of the book, I looked this up before I started reading it, and here's what Michael Pearl said after Hannah's death. He's one of the authors of the book. He said, "We share in the sadness over the tragic death of Hannah Williams. What her parents allegedly did is diametrically opposed to the philosophy of No Greater Joy Ministries and what is taught in the book to train up a child." If the Williamses had a copy of the book, Pearl said, they either didn't read it or totally ignored its contents. And I was like, wow, okay, so he's saying that they didn't do what the book said. All right, that's interesting. Maybe it's not directly linked. Maybe they took stuff out of context. Who knows? Then we get to this part where it says, in a telephone interview, Pearl, age 66, said spanking is just one part of a comprehensive program on child rearing and should be reserved for rebellion when children are angry or defiant. And in that, I was like, okay, I don't necessarily have a comprehensive philosophy on spanking. I know so many people are stepping away from it. I personally was spanked as a kid. I wasn't spanked a ton, but I can remember 2 times specifically. For me, I don't have any negative feelings towards it. I'm like, look, that's the choice that they made. I'm not scarred from it. It is what it is. With our kids, legally, we are not allowed to give them any sort of physical discipline, and so I've never had to think about if I would spank my kids or not spank them. So again, I don't have like a comprehensive philosophy on how I feel about it, but I'm like, okay, if it's reserved for rebellion, maybe they did take it out of context. Maybe there is something to what Michael is saying. Then I read the first chapter of the book, which again, we're going to get into. And in the majority of the sections that I have read so far, there involves instructions to physically reprimand your children. Now, spanking can, maybe he's saying like spanking on the butt is only reserved for this, but there's a part where they talk about putting something your kid wants on the coffee table that has now turned into the apple juice table. So if you're saying it's an apple juice table, that means it's a place that you put things, or that your kids put things that they are allowed to touch, that they are allowed to have access to, because it's now the apple juice table. So it says to take something that your kid wants, put it on that table, and when they reach for it, hit them with a switch. Like swat them on the hand. Okay, well that's not them being angry or defiant. They're reaching for something they want that's in a place that they're allowed to take things from. There's a part where it talks about when your child is breastfeeding, if they bite, to pull their hair. And technically, no, that's not spanking, but that is physically harming and giving physical repercussions to your children. So how out of context could they have taken it? Like, how far away from the remainder of the book, if that's just in the first chapter, is what Hannah's parents did? It goes on to talk about how there are different parts, like different sections in the book, but spanking is clearly the heart of the book. He that spareth the rod hateth his son from Proverbs 13:24 is cited often, as are other biblical references to discipline. Many Christians disagree with the pearls, but the Tennessee preacher argues the rod is a gift from God. A child properly and timely spanked is healed in the soul and restored to wholeness of spirit, he writes. A child can be turned back from the road to hell through proper spankings. Pearl encourages parents to think of the switch as a magic wand and says teaching a child to obey is like training an animal. A dog can be trained not to touch a tasty morsel laid in front of him. Can't a child be trained not to touch? Sure. But there are other ways. There are other ways. And we're going to get into some of like the alternatives and other things I have read, other approaches, and we'll dive a lot deeper into it as we get into the actual chapters and writings in the book. I just wanted to go over that first and talk about how this book, while maybe not directly responsible because a book cannot murder somebody, not directly responsible for these kids' deaths, but definitely played a part, and how Michael wants to say, oh no, like it's diametrically opposed. You should never spank out of anger. Okay, but you're pulling an infant's hair. And you say like an alternative has to be sought for bald kids, for bald babies. You're saying to pull a baby's hair if they bite your nipple while breastfeeding. I just think it is worth noting that I read this and I was like, wow, maybe people are taking these things out of context. I don't think they are. They're not, and he wants to say that they are to avoid scrutiny, but he deserves, and he and his wife deserve every last bit that they're going to get throughout this series. So, at this point in time, I'm going to take a little bit of a break because I have to go get the kids from daycare, but when I come back, it's going to be a different day. Wine Bee is going to be in full force, and we're going to get into chapter 1. Let's do this. It's time. Today I'm going to have this bottle of wine that my friend brought me. She works at Olive Garden and she said that they sell this for $30 a bottle, but last weekend she's my friend, but she's also my husband's cousin's girlfriend, and so they came to my father-in-law's house for a little barbecue. They stopped at a gas station on the way up, and all of these were on sale for $1, so she got a ton of them and brought some to us. So, not bad. Let's go. Now, I do want to go back to what we were talking about in the previous clip in the attempt of being fair to the pearls, which is something very important to me, even if I heavily disagree with something somebody else is saying. In the Seattle Times article, Michael Pearl does say that he would consider locking a child in a closet an extreme form of abuse, and he also says that after the age of 6, spanking is counterproductive, which is why he advocates against adopting older children, especially those from foreign countries, which is a completely other topic, the tendency to want to do international adoption so you can homeschool them and train them up in your fundamentalist ways. Whole other conversation, but there are things that these parents in the article did that he does not agree with and that do not come from his book. However, the book is still largely problematic, and if people are reading his book and they subscribe to the same religious beliefs, I can see how they would be in some sort of mental state where they are going even further and they're stuck in those extremist beliefs and they haven't taken the time to critically analyze what they're doing and they're going way too far. And so this book is kind of like a stepping stone on the journey to what has happened to these kids. There is a little bit of knowledge that I think is useful to kind of keep in your back pocket as we are going through this, and that is the fact that there are a lot of Christians who will use the Bible to justify spanking their children. And they will say, like, the Bible says I should spank my children, and so that is what I do. That is what I must do because it is in the Bible. Now, like Michael quoted, the verse that a lot of people use to justify spanking kids and physical discipline is that, like, quick phrase of, spare the rod, spoil the child. He who spareth the rod hates his child, stuff like that. And that comes from the book of Proverbs. Now, something important to know about the Bible that I don't necessarily think is talked about often enough, and if certain people could hear me say this, I think they would be very disappointed in me, because a lot of non-denominational Christians fall back on the fact that like the Bible is the living perfect work of God and we should rely on the Bible for all things. Everything should go back to the Bible. And if you try and say that something in the Bible is not true, then you are against Jesus, you are going your own way, you are against God, and you're just trying to make the rules up for yourself. The Bible was written by men, and that is something that I don't understand why it's not talked about more often. Proverbs was based on philosophies of King Solomon, who was the son of David in the Bible. And so King Solomon didn't write down exactly everything that went into Proverbs. A lot of it was actually written by people who were kind of in his council or like were around him a lot. They kind of compiled it and put it all together, and it was included in the Bible. And that's totally fine. And Solomon was a wise man, but he's still a man. And he has his own biases, he has his own ideas. Just because this is included in the Bible does not mean that it is a perfect interpretation of a message that God wanted to get out to people. Christians who grew up like learning to take everything in the Bible literally, we need to accept that. And it's hard because it means that you have to do more work. You have to do more research because other people are not going to do it for you. In Bible school, like in Sunday school, they're not going to go into, well, this is metaphor, and here's the backstory on this, and this is based on epics that exist in lots of different religions and lots of different cultures. They're not going to do that for you in most churches, so you have to take that onus on yourself, and it makes for more work, but it's important. And I think the massive waves of deconstruction we are seeing now are largely due to the fact that we have so much information available to us on the internet. It scares churches because some people are saying, you're not giving me the full story, I'm going to look at it for myself, and that's leading a lot of people to leave the church or disassociate from religion entirely, which is a completely different conversation. Back to the point though, Proverbs was written, I guess the ideas in Proverbs are mostly attributed to King Solomon. And so that full verse that people quote is Proverbs 13:24. And it says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." And if you think about kind of the larger picture of what that means, yes, it talks about a rod. And there are verses that instruct you to use a rod, like a literal rod. Let me find it. Proverbs 23:13-14. "Withhold not discipline from the child, for if you strike and punish him with the reed-like rod, he will not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell." So literally, there are verses in the Bible that tell you to use a reed-like rod to discipline your children. But if we go back to that first verse and we think more about the metaphor that is used for Jesus, and this was before Jesus came to earth, so I'm not saying that this is the intention of the verse, but Jesus is often talked about as a shepherd. And we get a lot of imagery with a rod and a staff. And shepherds use rods to guide their sheep and to discipline them, technically, when they are trying to go off course. And so, yes, there is a verse that literally talks about hitting your children. But the one that everyone loves to quote, "Spare the rod, spoil the child," that one, I don't think that necessarily refers to a physical rod. I think it refers to a metaphorical rod. Like, hey, if you just let your kids do whatever they want, it's probably not going to turn out the best. You need to guide them. You need to give them discipline. You need to give them healthy boundaries. And I think that we can all agree that having a sense of discipline and having boundaries, even into adulthood, is a good thing. And then finally, one last thing. I found this website called All Mom Does that I thought posed a really interesting point. This mom is talking about why she and her husband do not spank their kids despite being part of a church that says that you should do that. And one of her points is, we don't follow the guidance in Proverbs on physically disciplining adults, so I don't think it's fair to do it to children. Proverbs 20:30 says, blows and wounds scrub away evil, and beatings purge the inmost being. The King James Version even refers to the blueness of a wound, bruises, and stripes, wounds from a whip. I think few of us would agree with this type of physical discipline for adults, so why do we think it's okay for children, even if there are limits? And in fact, while most biblical spanking proponents insist that spanking should be administered on the buttocks and never leave a mark, which I am thankful for this guidance, by the way, there is no place in the Bible that indicates physical discipline should follow these standards. The guidance is completely man-made. Yeah, you might run into some fundamentalist sects where they do promote beating your wives like that and, physically disciplining your wives. But more on the mainstream side, even if you do have people who say like spanking is biblical or physical discipline is biblical, do they do that in their marriages? Do they do that to other adults that they perceive as misbehaving? No. If we ignore that verse, what's to say we can't choose to ignore the one about spanking our kids with reeds? Just a thought. I'm not going to read everything in here line by line, but we'll go over some of the most problematic passages in the first chapter. First line in the introduction says, this book is not about discipline nor problem children. The emphasis is on the training of a child before the need to discipline arises. It is apparent that most parents never attempt to train a child to obey. They wait until the child becomes unbearable, then explode. With proper training, discipline can be reduced to 5% of what many now practice. Where is that 5% coming from? Please advise Michael and Debbie. As you come to understand the difference between trainings and discipline, you will have a renewed vision for your family. No more raised voices, no contention, no bad attitudes, fewer spankings, and a cheerful atmosphere in the home and total obedience from your children. First thing, I will say, yes, if you make the rules very clear and you're very strict on those until it's clear that your kids get them, then you can loosen up. Personally, that is the approach that I took when we first got Monks and Beans. Every day there's the routine. Here are the rules. We do not have leeway. Like, this is how it is. At first it was, you don't touch the front or back door without asking. You do not go out there, because I don't know if they can escape. Like, I don't know how many locks they've messed with in their lives. I've gotten them a few years into them. So it's like, don't go by the doors. Do not touch them. Do not play with them. And now it's like, oh, hey, Monks, can you open the door for me? Because he knows that he can't just touch it whenever he wants. He understands he needs that permission. Just kind of general rules like that. So going into chapter 1, the authors just basically talk about how he goes to some parents' houses and it is just chaotic. There's no peace. There's no relaxation. A mom's always getting up to tend to the kids. Maybe she'll spank them a few times over the diaper, but she would never switch them. All she can do is lay down a field of fire and hope for the best. And then he talks about another instance where another mother walks in with her little ones and sits down to talk. She says to them, go out in the sunroom and play, and don't bother Mama unless you need something. For the next 2 hours, we are not even aware the children are present, except when a little one comes in holding herself, saying, pee-pee, Mama. They play together well, resolve their own conflicts, and don't expect attention when one turns the rocking horse over and gets a knot on her head. They don't come in and out. They have been told not to. This mother never spanked her children while at my house, and she never needed to rebuke them. She looks rested. When the other children are called to go home, one says, Mama, can I stay and play with Shoshana? Mother answers, no, not today. We have work to do at home. As he lifts his arms, the little fellow is picked up. Hugging his mother's neck, he says, I love you, Mama. This young mother said to me, my children want to please me. They try so hard to do everything I say. We have such fun together. She is looking forward to more children. They are the joy of her life, but there was a time when this was not the case. By the grace of God and through the simple biblical principles found in these pages, with determination and an open heart, this mother has trained up children who bring her joy and honor. I think if any of you have kids, you can see the appeal of being able to go to someone's house, have adult interactions, and not really have to be too concerned about your kids. That sounds amazing. And I don't think you can blame anybody for wanting to have that, for wanting to have kids who are able to entertain themselves, resolve issues, and, be trusted not to break anything or mess anything up while you are talking to your friends so that you can get rejuvenated by that adult interaction. I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting that, but training your kids to be fully compliant and obedient just sounds so extreme. This mom is like, oh, everything they do to please me. Okay, like, sounds like a power trip to me. I do not have any biological kids. I don't necessarily have a desire to have biological kids at this point anyway. But for people who do decide to have children, who make that conscious decision to try and get pregnant and grow their families, or to adopt and grow their families in that way, I have to imagine that their desire for having kids is not so that they can have these little obedient robots who only exist to please them. Right? Like, I feel like there has to be another motivation of babies are cute and I'd love to have one and, expand my family so that way I can share experiences with my kids that my parents shared with me, or so I can build a family and give them the best of everything, maybe because I didn't have the best of everything growing up, or because I didn't have that loving relationship with my parents growing up. I want to do better for somebody else. I don't know, but this just sounds very dystopian. Everything they do is to please me. They try so hard to do everything I say. We have such fun together. Yeah, of course, but you're going to teach your kids that they can't always get their way. So why is it okay for you to revel in the fact that they want to do everything you say and it's fun for you? Because yeah, kids thrive on approval, but they thrive on attention of any kind. They've just been taught that all they should have is that positive attention, because if they don't, they're going to get switched. Moving on. He goes into a section on obedience training and how your kids don't have to be able to have reason in order to be trained, because we can train mice and rats to respond to stimuli. Goes on to give another baseless statistic, I guess. 3/4 of all home discipline problems would be instantly solved if you could at any time gain your child's silent, unmoving attention. To the rear, march, translated into family language, would be leave the room or go to bed. Without question, they turn and go. This is normal in the well-trained family. I feel like that doesn't give room for your kids to grow into the adults that they want to be, or to grow into the kind of people that they want to be. And honestly, it makes me concerned for any kid who's taught that you just do things without questioning, because they're either going to suppress everything that they want to do, all of their desires, in order to please you, and then the second they get a taste of freedom, they're going to go buck wild and probably make some pretty reckless decisions that could end up okay, but could also lead to terrible things happening. Or you're gonna train them, like, this is assuming that they follow this and that they do everything they can to make you happy. Or you're gonna train them to never question authority, to always do what you say. If a teacher says something, if a pastor says something, if somebody in a position of authority who is perceived to be above them tells them something, then that is what they do. And they might grow up and just never explore who they really want to be. They might never question things that don't make sense, and they could live a totally unhappy life. My ideal vision of, if we end up getting to keep monks and beans, if we end up getting to raise them into adulthood, my vision of who I would want them to be is respectful people who aren't afraid to ask for what they want, or ask questions, ask why, say, can we look at it from a different perspective or a different point of view? I don't know, I think that you can have a sense of collaboration with your kids while still asserting the role of being the authority, because you just want what's best for them, and you are presumably a functioning adult who wants to raise them up to be functioning adults as well. Talks about the follies of horse training, the tone in which you should speak to your children. You shouldn't be yelling at them, because then you're going to train them to only respond to yelling, which does make sense to me. I mean, if kids like get it in their head that you're only serious when you are yelling at them, the first few times you ask them to do something, they're not going to take you seriously because they only respond when you yell and you're not yelling. That does make sense to me. Something so wild to me is this training not to touch section where I'll just read it to you. There is much satisfaction in training up a child. It is easy and challenging. When my children were able to crawl, and in the case of one, roll around the room, I set up training sessions. Try it yourself. Place an appealing object where they can reach it, maybe in a no-no corner or on an apple juice table. That's where the coffee table once sat. Literally like a contradiction. So you're gonna train your kid not to touch things that are, one, in the no-no corner, which if you have an area of your home where like the kid goes when they sit in timeout or that they're not allowed to go in, I don't know exactly what that means. Okay, fair. Like if it's in a spot that they know they're not supposed to be touching, yes, you should give them some sort of guidance and reminders if they're trying to go over there. No, you know you're not allowed to go in this room. In our instance, it's my office that has all of my work stuff in it and Ricky's video game stuff, my filming equipment. You don't go in that room unless you are invited in because there's a lot of expensive stuff in there and I don't want you yanking on it. So I get having that and giving reminders of that you don't go in there. But the other option is to put it on the apple juice table, which implies this is a place where things that they can touch go. Not only that they can touch, that this is a place they can put their things so that they can come grab them when they need them. They can put their drink here so they can come get it when they're thirsty, right? When they spy it and make a dive for it, in a calm voice say, no, don't touch it. They will already be familiar with the no, so they will pause, look at you in wonder, and then turn around and grab it. Switch their hand once and simultaneously say, no. Remember, you are not disciplining. You are training. One spat with a little switch is enough. They will again pull back their hand and consider the relationship between the object, their desire, the command, and the little reinforcing pain. It may take several times, but if you are consistent, they will learn to consistently obey even in your absence. So you're going to put something where they can reach it, where they're used to putting their stuff. Tell them not to touch it, and then hit them when they do. Okay. I mean, I guess as kids get older, it's easier to tell them, like, I don't know, if you put something down somewhere, say, hey, don't touch this, like, this is mine, or whatever. As they get older, that makes sense. They should learn to respect other people's things. But at what age are you starting to do this? Because I just feel like you're going to raise a kid who's afraid to touch things in their home. Even if they've been told, like, my stuff can go here. I can touch the stuff that's right here. Then you switch them for doing it. It's like they're going to be walking on eggshells wondering when they're going to get hit for touching what. It goes in to talk about Adam and Eve, how God was training them not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The next section, touchy situations, talks about hitting a kid on the hand for trying to take glasses off of your head. Not even a kid, a baby. The very young child not yet walking. So like a little baby hitting them for trying to take glasses off instead of just saying no and putting their hand down. I mean, you can physically show them no and like put their hand down, but why are you hitting a baby? Like, this logically doesn't make sense to me. Then he talks about pulling the hair of the child who bites the mother's nipple while breastfeeding, because that's not cruel or anything. It then goes on to talk about a dad who does booty camp sessions to train his kid to come when he calls him, like, immediately, which, I mean, I guess is a fair thing to do, but you don't hit the kid for not doing it, because here's like my thought on hitting your kid. I feel like it's kind of counterproductive to inflict physical pain on your child and then expect them to find comfort in you. I don't know, because like, here's the thing. If you say, he does the whole thing where he gives the kid a toy that he wants and then walks into a different room, calls the kid. When the kid doesn't come, he goes in, takes the toy away, says, hey, when I call you, you need to come immediately. Gives the toy back, tries it again, comes back. tries it again, and then comes and lightly spanks and lectures his kid. If you wanted to do this experience to train your child that whenever you call them, they need to come, because I can see how that would be a safety issue. Like if you're in a crowded place or the kid's like walking away to go somewhere and you're like at the park, you want them to have that instinct of, my parent is calling me, I need to go, because safety reasons. I can understand wanting to train your child in that respect. But say you were doing this without the spanking, and maybe you let your kid eat ice cream or cookies after dinner, and you're doing this experiment, and after the third time of them not coming, you go out and you say, hey, remember, when I call your name, you need to immediately come to me. Do you understand that? Okay, next time I do that and you do not come right away, you're not getting cookies after dinner. You can take that away from them, and while they might be upset or frustrated, that's not physically hurting them. Like, I feel like punishment by way of taking away a privilege and punishment by inflicting something on them physically are very different, because they might be frustrated with you, they might be angry, they might feel like you're being mean, and they might be upset with you if you take away a privilege from them that they want. But if you hit them, I feel like physiologically you are training your kid to like associate the fact that this person has scared me and inflicted pain on me, but I'm supposed to go to them right away. I'm supposed to love them. They also comfort me. I just feel like it's very conflicting. And again, I'm not trying to say that like you are a terrible person or a terrible parent if you've ever spanked your child, or if you've made the decision that in certain instances that will be the form of punishment they get. But if on a daily basis you are training your kid by physically hurting them, I just don't know what kind of issues that could potentially turn into as they get older. Because again, there were certain instances in which I got spanked as a kid. They were few and far between. They were certainly not every day or used in any sort of training sessions, but I got spanked, and I don't have any like ill feelings towards my parents or towards the spanking, because I knew that I was being defiant when I got them. The times that I remember getting spanked or getting threatened with a spank, it was because I was intentionally disobeying. And so if you've made that choice, I'm not here to say whether you're right or wrong, but if you are constantly using physical repercussions like every day, or you're setting up training sessions where you're going to tempt your kid and then switch them, it makes me concerned for what kind of mentality that could lead to as they grow up and potentially get into romantic partnerships. We've got another just like weird statistic here, a weird percentage where it talks about, on the other hand, dogs, 35 times smarter than cats. Where is that coming from? I mean, I'm partial to dogs, so I'm not mad, but like, where's your research? I don't know. The point that they're making is irrelevant, though. It's like talking about consistency and training before it becomes a problem. All right, so there are only 2 more sections in this first chapter that we're going to talk about. This next one is purchased compliance, and it's a short section, so I'll just read it to you. It says, parents who purchase compliance through promise of reward are making their child a racketeer who is paid for protection. The child becomes the mafia or union boss, and you, the over-the-barrel businessman. If you are just bargaining with a terrorist for 1 more day's reprieve from anguish, you may then strike a favorable deal, but if you are training up a child, you need to reconsider your methods. This compromise method is the making of a bitter, undisciplined, fleshly child and eventually adult. So that like beratement is in response to a dad saying he got his kid out of the checkout line like at the store peacefully by promising him ice cream. And while I do agree that it's probably best to just encourage your kids and help them understand appropriate ways to behave in a store, we got to give parents a break. Like, parents are tired, they are overworked. If whether they are stay-at-home parents and they're with the kid all day, or they go to work and they deal with work all day and then come home and spend time with their kids, like, any way you slice it, parenting is tough. And sometimes it really is just like, I cannot handle this right now. Please stop. And if you stop, I'll get you this after. It may be counterproductive in some ways, but you are also helping them understand delayed gratification. Just because you want something now doesn't mean you're automatically entitled to it, but maybe if we wait a little bit and we control ourselves, we can get something better after. I don't know how factual that is. I'm not a psychologist or a child counselor or anything, but that's a comforting way to look at it if you have a tendency to do that. And I think there is something to having like tangible rewards for good behavior. And then this last section says, I observed a father tell his small boy not to touch a particular object. Having been trained to ignore mild commands, the child picked it up. The father demanded, give it to me. The child pretended not to hear. Did you hear me? Of course he did. Hand it to daddy with more firmness. Johnny, give it to daddy now. Another decibel higher, hasty, angry. Johnny, am I going to have to spank you? By this time, the father became aware of his embarrassing tone. He calmed his voice, and in an attempt to bring it to a conclusion, he leaned way out and extended his hand, making it easier for Johnny to comply. Because of the angry voice and burning eyes, Johnny assumed the temporary posture of, oh well, there will be another day. But instead of meeting the humbled, groping father, he held the object in his general direction, but down close to his body, forcing the father to advance even farther to retrieve it. The father looked like a poor peasant receiving his necessary food from some condescending royalty, submitted to the child's humiliation, and reached to retrieve the object. And then, in a display of weakness, the father placed it out of the child's reach. What has Johnny learned from this episode? He has had his conviction reinforced that it is never necessary to obey a command the first, second, third, or fourth time. No one expects him to. He has learned it is permissible to grab anything within reach and to continue possessing it until the heat gets too great. He has learned not to respect authority, just strength. The day will come when he is the stronger one. By the father's example, he has learned how to use anger. By the father's advance to take the object from his hand, he has learned how to get in the last shot and maintain his defiance. The father was effectively training his small child to be a rebel. What has the father learned? That little Johnny is just a strong-willed child, that children go through unpleasant stages, that it is sometimes a very miserable, embarrassing thing to be a parent, and that one has to watch a kid every minute and put things out of reach, that the only things kids understand are force and anger, all of which are false. The father is reaping the harvest of his mistraining. After we look at the nature of a child, much of the rest of this book will describe many positive training techniques. So, in any case, I am interested in knowing those positive parenting or positive training techniques because I would like to know a good approach for that. If you have one, feel free to let me know. But that is all I have for today's video. I know there was a ton of info in here and a lot of my own personal anecdotes. I don't ever want it to come across as me being like, I have the answers. I know how you should parent. I'm just like sharing from my extremely limited experience. So if you have any parenting anecdotes or approaches that you want to share as well, feel free to leave them in the comments and let me know what you think of this. Do we need to keep going through the book? Do we need to have more conversations about it? Are there enough videos on this out here? I know Rachel Oates has done several videos that a lot of you guys have recommended to me. I watched like the first half of one of Rachel's videos about this, but then I was like, I don't watch other people's videos about the same topics that I discuss before I make my own because I want to make sure that I'm like giving my own original thoughts, but I know that they're out there and I know that they're good. So if we want to see more and talk about more in this book, let me know that as well. And if you're ready to move on, feel free to share that as well. And while you're doing that, if you would consider liking this video or subscribing to my channel, that would be incredible. And if you have subscribed already, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of you, and I love being able to just sit here, hang out with you, and talk about whatever. With all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Thank you so much for watching. Please be kind to people, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.